Namaste, everybody. Mera naam Anu Gautam ho. We're here today to discuss Nepali youth involvement as well as leadership in the community. As you know, it's been something that has been discussed in the past quite a lot. Today, we're hoping to kind of find some solutions, see how we can move forward and actually bring about change in our community with regards to involvement. So today we have a couple of speakers that have been taking on a lot of leadership and have stayed involved in the community for a number of years. So we have Asta Pandey. She's working in a software firm as a strategic partnership manager, but also she is the Miss Greater Vancouver World finalist, and then also Miss World Canada, or finalist for Miss World Canada. And then we have Ranju Upadhyaya. Sorry, I messed up.
That's okay.
And so she's the president of the Nepali Cultural Society of Manitoba with Marigold Pandari, which I've had the pleasure of working with in the past as well. She's been very involved in the Toronto Nepali community for the last little bit. And she is the former executive director of TNFF, which is very well known for being run by youth and having created a lot of youth involvement in that aspect as well as a board of director for NCWA. And then we have Krishna Parazuli. He is a youth activist and has taken a lot of initiative to stay involved in his community as well. So I guess what we can do, I would like for you guys to do a little bit of an icebreaker. So we'll start off with you guys introducing yourselves, because I guess my introduction can't do you justice. So if you guys could start off with who you are and what inspires you to stay involved in the community. Asta, if you want to start.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. सबैजनालाई नमस्ते. मेरो नाम चाहिँ आस्था पाण्डे हो र म आज ग्रेटर भ्यान्कुभर ब्रिटिश कोलम्बियाबाट हजुरहरूसँग लाइभमा जोडिएको छु. मेरो लागि चाहिँ प्रेरणा सबभन्दा धेरै मेरो स्कुलमा पढाउने टिचर्सहरूबाट आएको थियो, किनकि हाम्रो स्कुलमा चाहिँ कम्युनिटी एन्ड कल्चर डेभलपमेन्ट र इन्टरनेसनल अवेरनेस एन्ड इन्क्लुसिभिटीमा एकदमै फोकस गर्ने गरेको थियो. त्यसकारण आफ्नो सानोदेखि नै विदेशमा बास भए पनि मैले नेपाली रुट्स जहिले पनि स्कुलमा प्रदर्शन गर्न पाउँथेँ. अनि क्यानाडा सरेपछि पनि मैले युबिसीमा नेपाली स्टुडेन्ट एसोसिएसन सुरु गर्ने कोसिस गरेको थिएँ र अहिले चाहिँ म र मेरो 4 जना साथीहरू मिलेर नेपाली युथ कम्युनिटी अफ क्यानाडा भनेर सोशल मिडियामा एउटा नेपाली कैनेडियन नेटवर्किङ प्लेटफर्म खोलेको छौँ र अहिले चाहिँ मेरो इन्भल्भमेन्ट चाहिँ मिस वर्ल्ड क्यानाडा ब्युटी पाजेन्टमा मैले ग्रेटर भ्यान्कुभरलाई रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्ने अवसर पाएको छु र क्यानाडामा पहिलोचोटि नेपाली कैनेडियन केटी मैले मिस वर्ल्ड क्यानाडा जस्तो स्टेजमा भाग लिन लागेको छु. बेसिकली मैले चाहिँ अब आफ्नो कल्चर कम्युनिटी सोकेस गर्ने अवसर पायो भने चाहिँ समातिहाल्न मन लाग्छ त्यस्तो अवसर, किनकि मेरो लागि आफ्नो नेपाली कैनेडियन युथको इन्डिभिजुअल रिप्रेजेन्टेसन पनि मेरो लागि एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण छ.
Thank you. Ani, Ranju, if you want to go next.
Sure. I'm Ranju. So the reason, I guess my background, like in terms of employment, is in social science. I studied social science, so I'm getting involved as part of like public sociology. You want to maintain that connection, but I was involved in the community since I was younger. I think a big part of being involved in the community and maintaining community ties would be your parents or any support system. It doesn't necessarily have to be your parents. So I happen to be parents who were heavily involved, and I was kind of opinionated myself. So I got invited to be on the board when I was younger as like a youth member. So I enjoyed it. So it was something that I thought would add on to developing skills, and also I like the fact of having like a youth representation. I don't consider myself true youth anymore, but like I did like the idea of having like a youth representation throughout like any programmings we did to consider youth voices. So that's where I would say. Yeah.
Sounds good. Hey, you're always young. Marigold, if you want to go next. I think you're muted.
Yes, I was muted. Sorry. Namaste sabajanaलाई. मेरो नाम Marigold. Like Ranju, I have also been heavily involved in the Nepali community here in Toronto for probably as long as I can remember. So
as long as I can
8
remember.
or 9. So a long time. Also with having parents that are heavily influential in the Nepali community. But for me, more so, it is a personal interest as well. So my background is in international development and political science. So that's what I studied, and that is where my focus is. A lot of times I feel inspired to continue being involved in the youth community, just because I feel like there is opportunity for growth that hasn't been fully met. We have a huge lack of resources for not just youth, but just newcomers, but just Nepali people in general. I think that there needs to be a huge strengthening in the Nepali community, not just in Toronto, but all over Canada. So I kind of want to be not really influential in that sense, but I continue to try to do different things just so that there is still that linkage. The linkage is slowly, I feel, kind of disintegrating. There are obviously, what we're going to talk about, lots of obstacles today, but I stay involved because there is still opportunity. And when people kind of give up, we need people like, Asta, Ranju, Krishna, and me to just kind of, and you, Anu, to just keep it going, like tell people that, we're still here and we still want to make change, and there's a lot of change to be made.
I agree. I think Krishna Dai exited the call. So until he's back, we will wait for his introduction. I'll go over a little bit the agenda. So what I was hoping to do, I want to start off, obviously, the who are you guys, and then go into why youth involvement is so low and what is the value. Where are Nepali youth actually being represented, if not in the Nepali community? And then we'll go into kind of how we can potentially change that, how we can become more of a community, what that means. So that's a general overview of what I'd like to achieve today. To start off with, I did have a question, particularly to you guys with regards to your backgrounds as well. So I'll start with Ashta again. In kind of, you've been involved in a lot of beauty pageants, obviously a lot of other community involvement initiatives as well. What have you noticed are the obstacles from an organizational point of view? So, organizations like NRN or NCCS, or what do you think is something that is a barrier to entry for youth in that sense?
I'm going to talk from my personal experience. I feel like there are 3 points that are very important for us to recognize. सबभन्दा पहिला चाहिँ अहिलेको क्यानाडामा हुने भएका मेजोरिटी नेपाली युथहरूको लागि फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी चाहिँ उनीहरूको युजुअली आफ्नो पढाइ र करियर एडभान्समेन्ट नै हुन्छ। त्यसमा चाहिँ अब टाइम म्यानेजमेन्टको कारणले पनि हुन सक्छ इन्भल्भ नभएका, त्यो एउटा भयो। अर्को कुरा चाहिँ नेपाली संस्कृति नबुझेको कारणले पनि हुन सक्छ, जुन एकदमै फेयर कुरा हो किनकि उनीहरूको आइडेन्टिटी खासमा लाइक कैनेडियन हो नि त। सो व्हाट आई एम ट्राइङ टु से इज यहाँ चाहिँ तीनटा खालको नेपालीहरू युथ छ कि, एउटा चाहिँ यी जन्मेका, एउटा चाहिँ अलि ठुलो भएपछि नै यता आएका, सपोज युनिभर्सिटीमा, म चाहिँ त्यसरी नै आएको हो, म युनिभर्सिटीमा आएको थिएँ, र एउटा चाहिँ अलिकति टाइम नेपालमा स्पेन्ड गरेको छ तर फ्यामिली यता सरेपछि लाइक मेबी टिनेज एजमा यता आएको हुन्छन्। त्यो तीनजना टाइपको नेपालीहरूमा चाहिँ नेपाली संस्कृतिको डिग्री चाहिँ फरक हुन्छ। सम अफ देम हैव मोर कल्चरल ब्याकग्राउन्ड, सम अफ देम don't, and that depends अब उनीहरूले कतिको सोकिन गर्न सकेको छ आफ्नो कल्चर र यताको कल्चर, अनि आफ्नो इन्डिभिजुअल कल्चर कसरी बनाएको छ। सो मेरो विचारमा चाहिँ one of the barriers to entry is cultural clash and generational gap. त्यो दुईटा चिज चाहिँ हामीले रेकग्नाइज गर्नुपर्छ किनकि युथ भनेको अब हाम्रो फ्युचर हो। संस्कृति भन्ने चिज पनि अब एउटा समय अनुसार नै परिवर्तन हुन पर्ने कुरा हो। त्यसकारण हाम्रो युथसँग यदि हाम्रो नेपाली संस्कृति हामीले जोगाइराख्न चाहन्छौँ भने उनीहरूले एक्सेप्ट गर्ने सक्ने किसिमले हाम्रो संस्कृति र कैनेडियन संस्कृति दुवैबाट राम्रो शिक्षा छानेर आफूलाई पनि परिवर्तन गर्न सक्नुपर्छ, जुन मेरो विचारमा चाहिँ हाम्रो आमा बाबाको ठुलो जिम्मेवारी हो।
Marigold, I know you have a couple of opinions around this. What do you think as well?
So very well said, Asta. That was one of the main points as well. I think that that is obviously the biggest probably factor is that we are, here busy with our own lives, whereas our parents have already created a platform, have backgrounds in it, and we're busy trying to kind of maybe live up to that. Some other and same thing, this is from my personal experience. I think a huge factor that goes into an obstacle is personally just and this is not in a negative sense, and I will explain why, just the politics sometimes of everything that goes involved into different organizations. And I'm not just speaking of one organization, I'm speaking of like various other ones. And I think that is a driving factor into why a lot of youth may not want to join. There is a lot of divisions unknowingly in the Nepali community. And I think that's just, and I think we have to, as youth, we have to understand that that is just the culture that was brought here from Nepal with the people that came here. So with the older people that came here, it is from what they have learned. It is what what they are used to. So that's brought here. And that's not necessarily something that we want, maybe not want to be involved in, because, if I'm involved in something, I just want to be involved wholeheartedly. I don't want any kind of conflict. I want any, kind of divisions. मलाई जहाँसम्म लाग्छ हामी सबै नेपाली हो. I don't think, that, we need to be like, okay, there needs to be not, and like I said, this is not, a backlash to anybody. At the same time, we do need to identify each group, maybe, Rai, Gurung, from Baglung, from Gulmi, that's, it's all great. But in terms of a huge social platform, as an organization, as NRN, we need to be inclusive of all Nepalis everywhere and not really have, so much politics all the time. So that is one barrier that I can say.
Do you think that there is that sort of divide between youth? Because personally, for myself, I don't care. I know, like, I don't care if someone is Gurung or someone is not Gurung. I can't think of any other names for now, but
So personally, in my experience, and like you touched upon, I was the former executive director of TNFF, which for those of you who don't know, it's the Toronto Nepali Film Festival. So we are a youth-based, youth-led organization. And so I've, in all of the background, and when I'm talking of youth, we've had older youth, younger youth, people who are just in high school, people who already have some background. And I don't find that division is here, but like Asta said, that is also a generational thing. That is also a cultural thing. We have learned much differently in terms of division. We don't really divide. We don't really do those things here brought up in Canada. And like I said, we have to understand that may just come along with, Abo Nepal Bada Ako, it's kind of like, it's just been brought here with that, that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but it is definitely an obstacle, I find.
Fair. I want to challenge you a little bit on your opinion. So with regards to the divide, what actual actions does it translate into that politics? So like, what specific situations have you noticed that in where it actually creates a divide and it takes away from our community?
But what happens, I find, same thing, and it is that you have sometimes just, and this is normal in any community probably, it's just a smaller cluster of people that are always involved in everything. And
Right.
Those small clusters are the ones that make decisions for a lot of people. And,
Right.
It's the same people over and over again. And I think that's also another challenge. If we want to branch out and if we want to get more people involved, we need to branch out. We need to look into the community, which is huge here here in Nepal, here in Canada. It's huge. We have, I don't know the
like 40,
statistics.
50,000 people.
Yeah, we have,
estimate.
as an estimate. So in those 40,000-50,000 people, are we saying that there's only, 8 people in general that always want to be involved? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Can I add on to something I think both of you touched on? I think it's not just a generation gap, it's like the idea of who holds culture. So I think there's this idea from older people that younger people are not holder of like knowledge, but we are replete with our own. Culture is not a static thing, it has to change. Like anyone who studies culture knows that it's a fluid thing, it has to accommodate. So everyone comes to culture differently. So I think from my personal experience, I think sometimes the gap happens is that like youth don't get acknowledged as someone who's like a holder of a certain type of knowledge, because that you can't be holding the same culture throughout, then you're not adapting to the needs. And I like from my personal experience when I was growing up, I think there was more of like we had to assimilate. Like I like when I was younger, like my parents were involved, but they were also big on like assimilate to like the North American type of thinking. But as I obviously studied culture more, I'm like that's not the way we should go. But I think it's a well-intentioned idea that parents had about having their kids adjust to schooling, but it's not the best thing to promote resiliency. Like studies show that youths who acknowledge both aspects of their, let's say, dual identity are the ones who tend to be more resilient. So I think, but I do think that there's like I wouldn't say reluctance, but I think older generation don't quite hold younger people. And as I'm getting older, I notice this too, is that no, like even an 18-year-old can come here with their knowledge, and it's a knowledge that's valuable that can contribute. So if you're not willing to accept that as a knowledge, who are you preserving this culture for? It's for the youth, right? So you need to take their perspective into mind. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, okay.
May I actually add something to
Yeah.
what Ranju said? So मेरो विचारमा चाहिँ youth भनेको चाहिँ एकदमै नयाँ सोच हो। उनीहरूले नयाँ कुराहरू सिकिरहेका हुन्छन् हैन, प्लस अहिले डिजिटल इराको जेनेरेसनमा यति धेरै इनोभेटिभ आइडियाजहरू छन् जुन हाम्रो फ्युचर जेनेरेसन्सले पनि एक्सेप्ट गर्न सक्छन्। हामीले आफ्नो ट्रेडिसन्सहरूलाई कायम गर्दाखेरि युथको आफ्नो सोच विचारहरूलाई पनि इन्कर्पोरेट गर्न पर्छ। अहिलेको हाम्रो लाइक रन्जु सेड असिमिलेट गर्ने कुरा, हामी पनि नेपाली संस्कृतिमा असिमिलेट हुन सक्छौँ भने हाम्रो बाबा आमाले पनि केडियन कल्चरमा संस्कृतिमा असिमिलेट गर्न सक्नुपर्छ हाम्रो लागि। यसलाई हामी कल्चरल एभोल्युसन भन्छौँ हैन। मेरो विचारमा चाहिँ के हुन्छ भने हाम्रो आमा बाबाले युथलाई चेन्जिङ एजेन्ट बनेर सपोर्ट गर्नुपर्छ के। त्यो चेन्जिङ एजेन्ट हुने एउटा पोटेन्शियल चाहिँ हाम्रो आमा बाबामा नै छ, किनकि उनीहरूले नै आएर नेपाली कम्युनिटी यहाँ बसाएको हो हैन। अनि त्यो एक्सपेक्टेसन जुन उनीहरूले हामीसँग राख्छ नि, तिमीले नेपाली संस्कृति सबै बुझ्न पर्छ भन्ने एउटा एक्सपेक्टेसन चाहिँ छ। अनि द्याट कम्स फ्रम आई फिल लाइक एउटा हायरार्किकल पोजिसन के। like Ranju said, when you're youth, you don't have much credibility in the society, so they don't like listening to what you have to say. Jun mero bicharma चाहिँ is a very pessimistic approach, because if you force a person into learning something, be it culture, be it any sort of education, they're not going to learn it properly. So the only way to really move forward properly is to assimilate both cultures together and really understand what it means to be a third culture kid, right? And all of us are third culture kids when you think about it. We're multilingual. We are living in a different society where people look so different from us. There's so much diversity in this country, right? And that's why I think parents-हरु, आमा बाबाले पनि आफ्नो संस्कृति कायम गर्नलाई यहाँको संस्कृति अपनाउन पर्छ, and that is a very important fact. त्यसकारण हामीले नेपाली youth community of Canada खोल्दाखेरि पनि हामीले age difference भएको मान्छेहरु बोर्डमा राखेको छौं सुरु गर्दाखेरि, and we're actually looking for regional managers, volunteer managers who can actually handle Nepali youth community of Canada in their regions. We started off in British Columbia. We have an 18-year-old on board who's turning 19 soon. We have a 25-year-old on board. We have a 27-year-old on board who's turning 28 soon. We have a 22 or 4-year-old on board. So हामीले चाहिँ त्यो youth को एउटा range राख्न खोज्छौं, किनकि you can learn from people who are younger than you. That's a fact. मैले आफूभन्दा सानो मान्छेहरूसँग धेरै सिकेको छु र हामी ठुलो मान्छे अब म चाहिँ ठुलो मान्छे होइन तर म अहिले 25 वर्षको भएँ मतलब युथको हिसाबले अलिकति एल्डर रेन्जमा छु हाम्रो रेस्पोन्सिबिलिटी के हो हाम्रो यङ्गर जेनेरेसनलाई हामीले मद्दत गर्नुपर्छ उनीहरूलाई एसिमुलेट गर्नलाई मेरो विचारमा I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, of course. I'm also curious, like Ranju, being in a leadership position, what are some obstacles you have faced in that?
I'm gonna not say I had a atypical experience, but I came into it because uncles were looking for like a younger voice, and I just happened to have a supportive. It doesn't mean that we didn't have arguments. There were certain things that I thought like you can't bring a Nepali mentality into doing things. I think a big issue becomes that we forget that now we're a diaspora. We're not back in Nepal. We're out of Nepal. So like differences need to be celebrated, but you can't be pockets of differences if you think you're going to amplify your voice. And I think sometimes we get, and I think even I have this like fault of just looking into differences and not recognizing, difference needs to be acknowledged, but that we are like there's a singular goal, and when you're an organization of trying to amplify that organization's voice, right? So if you're focusing on on inclusivity, not that you are saying this person is different this way, but it's that their differences can come together to make a voice that we can amplify. So I would say relatively I just like the Nepali community in Manitoba just happens to be much smaller than Toronto, BC and stuff. So I pretty much knew everyone in there. So I started out as like a director of communication, and it was kind of like a co-director. So I kind of got to learn the ways. So I won't say I learned the system, but I learned how to kind of manage it. So if someone's disagreeing on this point, to kind of know what gets them. So I think I just had an easier experience than someone who hadn't been. I've been involved in the anti-Semitism community for the 10 years. I do sometimes feel uncomfortable because I'm not very comfortable speaking Nepali. I understand it, like I understand that part. So I think that's a major obstacle if I have to like give speeches and stuff. Like my mom and dad are like, "Are you a Nepali president?" And you don't feel comfortable speaking Nepali. It's not that I don't feel comfortable speaking Nepali, but I don't think that there might be mistakes I say in Nepali that makes my message like obsolete because people are focusing on, I said Timi instead of when I should have said Hajur or something like that. But definitely in the Nepali like learning, my nieces and nephews came from Nepal. So then I realized that I need to it doesn't matter how imperfect my Nepali is, I need to practice it because I do want my nephews, nieces to continue speaking Nepali. I think that's a big part of being Nepali, but it's not just speaking, it's I think I definitely think my parents' generation tend to focus a lot on differences, but differences for the sake of talking about differences, not differences for how do we move away from what is the commonality here. So that's kind of sorry, I think I went off track there, but
can I just add to Ranju's point?
Yeah,
so I completely agree, and I think that another thing, like Asta pointed out before, is that a lot of the time the elder generation, when they're looking at differences, they don't realize the similarities, because I also do want to speak Nepali. I do speak Nepali fluently as well, and like Ranju said, it's just that I've been in Canada for the last 25 years, so almost all of my existence, so I speak English, but मेरो नेपाली पनि प्रश्न छ. So I also want to continue the Nepali culture. I want to continue the Nepali identity. I do want to speak Nepali. I do want to teach my someday kids that to speak Nepali and to preserve the culture. We do have the same interests as the elder generation, and like they were saying before, there is a hindrance because it seems, I think most of the time it feels like we don't want those things because we are here and we are brought up in Canada, but it's not that we don't want those things, it's we want those things in a different way.
Right.
So we still want to, like I said, I would, have an organization, we still want to have youth leadership, we want to have inclusivity, we want all of those things, but instead of, like Ranju was saying, हामी नेपालमा अहिले छैनौँ, you know, we are in Canada, so we need to, one, like they were both touching on, we want same values, and we want that, but we want to be acknowledged that we want that, and we want status in the sense that, you know, yes, we want the same things as you, and we want to be heard. And I think that's where it comes down to acknowledgement, hierarchy, you know, kind of a status that youth, as they were pointing out, youth have a status of being lower, which is not necessarily true, same thing. And you know, there are, you know, we just need to say that, you know, we do want the same things as you, just we want it in a different way. I think that that's the main, you know, message there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with regards to, I want to bring it back to kind of what Asta said about time as well. So our parents have, you know, sacrificed so much to come here. There's a lot of pressure on our generation as well to be able to almost like pay back that sacrifice and be able to be successful. So a lot of youth, I think, are focusing on their careers, they're focusing on education. So that idea of community that I guess the older generation has of maybe celebrating Dasai together or Tej together, whatever it is, I don't think youth have that same sort of idea, because our priorities are different, but that doesn't mean that they don't want a community as well, right? So like if you see, for example, when I was in university, there were a lot of other clubs, like people from India or Persian communities were really strong in this as well, where they supported each other in distributing like schoolwork or mentorship programs, like something that really was valuable to them and the things that they cared about, as opposed to, you know, maybe like having a party or whatever it is. I think that's where I see lower turnout in events versus where it's beneficial to the youth as well. I want to move on to kind of the next question, which is, what is the value that youth can bring? And what are areas that we can kind of support the community in? Because right now, all of the events that are happening, there is low turnout, there's low interest. Why do you think that is? And where do you think we can actually support and empower youth?
If I may go first.
Yeah.
I actually am going to tie it into our previous question as well. I feel like there's a lot of synergy there. Youth, like once again, it's naya generation. So they're our future, and everyone knows that. And youth like define garda हेरे हामी 15 वर्षदेखि 30 वर्षको रेन्जलाई youth भन्ने गरेछ हैन. अनि त्यसमा चाहिँ हामीले के recognize गर्नुपर्छ भने 15 वर्ष भनेको बच्चा हैन, young adult हो. 30 वर्ष भनेको बच्चा हैन, adult हो. And youth ko range ma pani there is a degree of age differences, and your differences like हामी कसरी like-mindedness ma बनाउने, that should be the approach के हाम्रो older generation, आमा बाबाको generation मा एउटा expectation भन्ने चीज छ, and that is very prevalent in the society itself. And there's also the fear of what will society say, because there's a certain definition of what stability really means. So if you're a 30-year-old who's not married, that's going to be a serious problem, because our society has recognized 28 plus to be a stable position. But Canada is a different place. हामी नेपालमा छैनौं, number one. Number two, again, नेपालमा भए पनि क्यानाडामा भए पनि the youth is changing, the culture is changing. परिवर्तन भन्ने चीज हरेक generationमा हुन्छ. यो कुरा recognize गर्ने change चाहिँ, because the generation above us is a lot older, it's harder for them to change. And that's something that the youth needs to also recognize. So what I'm trying to get to is the approach. The approach is so important. Nepali bhasako kura garyo bhane, I am fluent because my mom's approach was to play a lot of Nepali music and movies in the background. I was never forced to learn the language, but I had to because everyone was watching that type of media. Yeah. So it's the approach one takes to gauge interest in their child to preserve their language or their culture. So I think in the main barrier is that there is this inability of change in the elder generation, or unwillingness of change, because a lot of kids are struggling in their third cultureness. You know, they're trying to find their identity between being Nepali and Canadian. And I think our focus should be on that. Our focus should be on the fact that we need to change our approach. I don't know if that really answered the question, but I just really wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, in terms of like value itself, what do you think? Because there is a lot that I guess the older generation can do. There's a lot that the youth can do as well. What value do you think the youth can bring to our community?
Skills,
Right.
new skills, like very new skills. Let's be honest. The generation we have today, they're growing up with technology. I come from an IT background in the sense that I never studied IT. I studied economics and political science and Chinese philosophy, but I got the opportunity of working in an IT firm. And that really, really opened my eyes to what artificial intelligence is, what Internet of Things is, what autonomous machines are, and how the youth actually grows up with smartphones. You know, I got my first iPhone when I was in, I think, 10th grade, only because I was going camping and my parents needed to give me a phone. And everyone had a smartphone by that time, so I wanted one too. But अहिलेको youth iPad चलाउँछन्, अहिलेको youthलाई YouTube कसरी चलाउन आउँछ बच्चामा 3 वर्षको उमेरको बच्चाले युट्युबमा गएर युट्युब भिडियो निकाल्न सक्छ भने मतलब हाम्रो youth कति skilled हुन सक्छ होला फ्युचरमा। त्यो skillsहरू हामीले आफ्नो culture preserve गर्दाखेरि राख्न सक्छौं. For example, there might be a computer scientist among us who, I don't know, codes in Nepali language on Duolingo someday, you know? That's just one example. We really need to utilize the skills and strategies that the new youth has actually attained by being in the generation that they're in, the digital era that they're in. So I think we really need to give our kids more credibility and give them more responsibility, because if they don't have that responsibility and trust from the elder generation, again, the whole hierarchical issue, बच्चा भनेपछि उनीहरूले धेरै बुझे आउँदैन. हामीसँग wisdom छ किनकि हाम्रो experience धेरै छ. जुन सही हो, experience तपाईहरुको धेरै छ generation ठुलो generation को, तर हाम्रो experience फरक छ. And that different experience is always a very good source of new information. Yeah.
So I want to say that I think a huge barrier is the lack of information. So not just in terms of, you know, the digital age, like we focus on youth a lot because we use a smartphone and stuff. But as you can see in my background, I read a lot of books. I was a youth that didn't like, you know, I shouldn't technically, I'm 33, so I'm past the youth age. But, you know, like I said, I read a lot of books, you know, I think, and, you know, there is a huge lack of information. And I think that is also something that hinders turnout, because you just don't know, you know, what's going on. I think that the elder generation sometimes is so focused on what they want to do, the organizations that they have, and, you know, yes, you know, that you know, all the other things, the positive things that are going around in the background that other, you know, like I said, Nepali youth are doing. So in terms of touching on Asta's, you know, point there's actually a Nepali here in Toronto, a Nepali coding group, a youth Nepali coding group. So if you are coders, which there are, you know, and that you're interested, you know, at any level, you can join this Nepali youth group. How do I know? Because I am, you know, involved in Nepali youth. You know, but does an elder generation know? No, they don't know. Would they know? No, because they don't ask the youth what's going on. Yes, there's no, you know, and like I said, another thing with the lack of, you know, turnout is just like Asta was pointing on, is basic interest. You know, as you were pointing out in your university experience, I think what we really lack as a community across Canada is, like we were all pointing on, is unity. If you look at other you know, communities, the Indian community, you know, and even in the Indian community, the Punjabi community, even if there's divides, the divides are so strong. Their communities are very unified. You know, there is nothing, like if you look at the, you know, Sri Lankan culture, the Tamil culture, they have mandirs everywhere. You know, how do they do that? Because their community sense of community is so strong, and we lack that here in, you know, the Nepali community. And that's because, like I said, lack of information and and is based on interest. We talk about, helping newcomers, but what do? We don't have anything to offer them. We have huge organizations, but what do we offer them? We cannot even offer them a free, like I said, a free information session, in the sense of, we have, tax. I went to one myself because, for the first time I did taxes myself, I think a year ago, 2 years ago, and I went to a free Nepali tax clinic, and kid you not, I was the only person there. There are free services, but for whatever reason, for whatever barriers there are, people don't want to do it. We need to, like Asta said, to change the approach. We need to figure out what it is that, not just youth, but as a Nepali community, what do we really need? What do we need as in, here in Canada? So, like I said, in terms of positivity, I think you'll touch on that later, so I'll save that. But, we need to change the approach, and what are the actual physical needs of the Nepali community? Not what do you want us to need, but what do we actually need? Where can we go to school? Where can we learn, like I said, the French language, English and French and Nepali? Where can we learn Nepali language? There's Nepali, language classes here. Even when we did Toronto Nepali Film Festival, still till now, even though it's been run for 10 years, there are a lot of people who have no idea about this. It's been run for 10 years. We work with, international, on an international platform, and still so many Nepali people don't know about this. We had more, I guess, other diverse community turnout, but less Nepali turnout. We have to really understand what the actual physical needs of Nepali individuals here in Canada before we can try to, celebrate Dasai. I'm not saying that that's not, great.
Important.
Dasai is great, but we have to look at it in the sense that Dasai will always be celebrated. Just like Christmas, Dasai will always be celebrated. Tihar, Dasai, Diwali, Bhai they will always be celebrated. But on a day-to-day basis, is that our physical need? No, our physical need is, how can we, like Asta was saying, Ranju was saying, how can we develop our career? How can we advance? While assimilating, how can we do that? How can we, maintain the respect? How can we, maintain that pressure that is given to us by, our parents? Oh, okay, you know what? Timi धेरै पढ्नु पर्छ, doctor हुनु पर्छ, engineer हुनु पर्छ. But how can I do that? What do I need to fulfill that for myself and for the community?
And I really want to touch upon one point, or add to your point, Marigold. It's just, like you said, newcomers ko lagi ke garchhau hami bhanera. I came here 7 years ago when I was 18, alone. My family lives in China, so I had no one here. I had my uncle and auntie in Surrey, which was 3 hours away from school on transit. So I couldn't be going every single day. So I really had to assimilate myself in this culture and really look for Nepali people, because I personally craved the community. I did. I craved the Nepali community because when I was in China, I was heavily involved in the Nepali community in embassy events, performances, everything, culturally, language-wise, food-wise. So when I craved that, I had to make a really big initiative to go out there and start meeting people, like-minded people, people who are not like-minded, let's say. And I had to do all of that on my own. And it would have been so much easier if there was a platform that I knew about. And that could be a marketing problem. That could be a reaching out problem. But then again, 7 years in, and it's the first time I got to know about NRNA Canada, right? Only last month. There's a NCSBC community here in BC. There's a Nepal Youth there's a women's society, there's a CanFax, there's so many different communities, but there's no one community that has all of this information there for a person who comes here, if that makes sense. So as a newcomer 7 years ago at the age of 18, I was very lost, and it was really hard for me to find like-minded individuals. For the longest time, I didn't have any Nepali friends, and I was seeking comfort in the Desi community, which, very honestly, Nepali people, I don't know if we really fit into the whole Desi culture. Yes, part of us does because of the media exposure, but the other part of us is very Nepali. It's not Desi per se, if you know what I mean. And it's finding comfort in the Desi community, be it the Bangladeshi Student Association, be it the Pakistani Student Association, be it the Indian Student Association. There's still that Nepali-pon and Bhasa missing, for somebody who just came to the country. So what are we doing for newcomers? That's a problem that I think I would like to address. Because I was a newcomer 7 years ago, and not all of my needs were met. And a lot of the newcomers I spoke to, not a lot of their needs were met. And one of the things that I figured was there's a very strong local community too. And how do we bridge the local community to newcomers? Like, कसरी bridge गर्न सक्छौं त्यो पनि एउटा problem हामीले solve गर्न पर्छ मेरो विचारमा.
Can I just add on to a point you guys were both, I think you guys both touched on it, but I think a big like strength, but something that we need to acknowledge is that youth is not a monolith. You guys acknowledge that there's a range of age, but also that range of experience. Like some youths are people who grew up here, so they probably have more support here. A youth that's coming from like out of Canada or like a newcomer youth, they would have different needs. So I think that any service that's geared to trying to helping youths need to understand that it's not a monolith. You're not, like I'm going to give an experience of millennials because it comes up a lot. They get treated as like a monolith group, but like the oldest millennials turning 40. So that person, for example, has a different need than I think 25 is the last cutoff age. Yeah. So there's like a difference. So, and it's the same thing in youth too. You can't treat it as like one program fits all. It's that any service that you're hearing needs to acknowledge that youths are coming from different walks of life. Some might be refugees, some might be immigrants, some might be coming here on student visas. So they have different specific needs. So yeah, trying to approach them, like amplify their voice, but also acknowledge that they're not a monolith. And I think that's a problem that the older generation also has. They can acknowledge differences across generations for them, but they tend to like make a youth into a monolith. So I'm like, what 18-year-old is going to say is not probably the same as what a 28, 29-year-old is going to say. So I think that needs to be I think that's both a strength and an obstacle in trying to help or like amplify the voices. That how do you amplify differences, but it comes off as like a voice of unity, that kind of thing.
And that's why we need a diverse demographic in the board of these associations in terms of age, in terms of background, in terms of experience, exposure in this country. I think it's super important to have folks who've probably been in the country for only 3 years, and then also have folks on the board of whatever association who've been around for 15 years, let's say, because those experiences matter and representation, right? End of the day, we're talking about representation of demographics. So definitely agree with you, Ranju.
I just want to add one quick thing. I know you want to speak, but one thing when you were talking about the value. So I think, as they both touched on, the value is huge. The potential is huge, in the youth, like you were saying, from any range. And like, that's why I said myself as youth in brackets, because, I do consider myself a youth, but, maybe, to other people, I'm, an older youth, maybe. But the value is huge in the sense of what they were all touching upon is that, there's a very skilled, different level skill range. So that's a potential that's huge. And I think one thing that is, as you were saying, that in terms of lack of information, so one thing that I wanted to touch upon is just one thing that I, as a personally have experienced. Asa's experience may be different, Ranju's might be different, but what I think is really, like I said, a thing that is really undervalued in the elder generation and still with youth is women. Women are very undervalued to this day. And like I said, I would have loved to have Krishna, I would love to have heard what he had to say, just because his perspective will be much different. And I find that a huge obstacle that I have faced in my youth and my, like I said, and I'm different from a lot of other people because I'm heavily involved. But, I find that one of the huge obstacles for me as a youth was being a youth woman. I had a lot to say, and I had, I have, strong, I'm very opinionated, like, Ranju was saying, Asta was saying, I'm opinionated. And sometimes, like I said, a huge obstacle is that the organizations that are led, that are devised, are all male. They're all male, and the panel is male, and and like I said, this might not necessarily be a bad thing, But if we want to unify, and if we want to, expand, we need women. And like there will be, elections, and why they don't win, because all the women don't go to vote, because all the women are not really involved in NRN. If they are, or NCWA or NCCS, it doesn't matter. They're not turning out to vote because they're not interested. And if they're not interested, who is going to get elected? Males. And like I said, I'm not here bashing males. You definitely need males, but that is a huge undervalue in our society. And it doesn't matter. I don't think, even now at my age, even here, it's like I said, I speak out, and sometimes, like I said, uncles, they don't like that. And that deters me from wanting to have a voice. Not necessarily, it's not going to stop my voice, but it's definitely going to make me not want to go back to a certain organization or involve myself with certain people. Of course, there is a level of respect to everybody, but like I said, not just myself, but there are huge strides that women, youth, and just like older women, youth have made in this country as Nepalis, but it's not there. So that's an obstacle, and that is undervalued. And until we value the people who take care of our children, who raise us, who give us those values as equal as our fathers, which also play a huge role, we if we I think sometimes it's better to reach out to women. Do you know why? Because we are the one kura, whether it be kura karne or kura sharing, it goes through women. So how can you tell people to go to a certain event? Speak to their moms, speak to aunties. That's how you get more across, because then they say, oh, janu parcha, sari lagaunu parcha, oh, pote launu parcha. You know what I mean? They will get dressed up. You will have a different energy if you same thing, if you target women as well. And I feel that a lot of the organizations and a lot of what they want to do is not women. I wouldn't say women centered, but it doesn't interest women. Coding, like I said, may be more seen as a male thing, but there are women that are interested. Involve women, that will get you maybe more ticket sales. I don't know, but that is something that I really thought is important, because there is still, that mindset, and unfortunately that's brought from Nepal to here, the mindset that women, same thing, just like youth, there is a hierarchy. And same thing, as me, as a youth woman, I have more to prove than a youth male, because now I'm married. घर पनि चलाउनु पर्छ, काम पनि चलाउनु पर्छ, career पनि advance गर्नु पर्छ. So you know what, it's actually worse for and worse for female Nepali youth women, because you have now an added level of expectation, and you can't feel that. Of course, I want to go out and I want to join an organization, but how can I do that? घर पनि कसरी चलाउने, घर चलाउँदा साथै म कसरी involve हुने? Because how can I give myself time to work, time to take care of my house, and time to be involved in an organization? How is that possible? And that's something that we need to look at in term when you want to target. Like I said, as Ranju was saying, it's not an age group. There are individual specific needs, and we need to look at those needs are the first thing that you need to look at. What do newcomers actually need when they come here? What are the first steps? What are the steps as an international student? Because that's a whole different, that's a whole different section as a newcomer. Being a newcomer is different, and being an international student is totally different, And same thing, even as, someone who's, grown up here, born here. Okay, how do I learn Nepali? What are the actual needs of the community, and how can we get those things to where we need it?
I'm gonna.
I'm so sorry. May I just one point, just to add to the whole women's issue? I have a lot to say, but to keep it brief, as brief as I can, I want to add that it's funny that women are not so involved, because the gender role expectation of preserving our culture has been handed to women. When you think about it, if you really want to preserve your culture, that role has been handed to women, because women have been because of the society, put in a position where they are more involved in their children's lives than the men are. The generation now is definitely different. Both parents have equal involvement in their children's lives, but the generation above us, I'm pretty sure our moms had more cultural say over things that happened in the household from a very cultural perspective. So when it comes to preserving culture, why is it that we don't have enough representation of women on the board? Why? It makes no sense. It's only logical to have more women on the board, right? So I just want to point that out. And I also want to point out that along with gender roles and specializations that the Nepali community has imposed on us women, there are a lot of restrictions too that women have, been given. For example, curfews are maybe shorter than for male children and families. So if I want to get involved, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to stay till midnight somewhere. But maybe when I get home at midnight, my parents are not going to be too happy with that type of culture, And I've seen that in the community here, in the Nepali community here, from people who've lived here for so long, who want their children to be involved, but still at the same time want them to get home on time. So there's a lot of discrepancy there. And one of the examples I want to give you that I'm working on is that I actually partnered with the Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. It's basically a campaign जुन नेपालमा बेस भएको राधा पाउडर फाउन्डेसनले सुरु गरेको हो menstrual equity को लागि advocate गर्न लागेको. And I'm taking this onto my Miss World Canada platform because it's very important to recognize the global taboo or the global stigma there is on menstruation, being one of the examples. And dignified menstruation framework लिएर आफ्नो जीवनमा कसरी menstrual restriction र discrimination लाई completely हटाउन सक्छौं हामीले. त्यो campaign. And just like that campaign, there needs to be more campaigns on different subject matters. From puja गर्ने देखि लिएर technicality of दशैं. Like tika यसरी लाउनु पर्छ रे. How is a child who grew up in Canada with Canadian Sanskriti at school, who probably knows more about Christmas than Dasai, expected to know every single technicality in Dasai or Tihar? Really
or not just that, just the importance of Dasai.
Yeah, what is Dasai? When I ask kids what Dasai is, they're like, a family gathering. What is the importance? It's good over evil. There's a whole Ramayana story about that. There are multiple interpretations actually about Dasera when you think about it. Multiple different regions in India have different stories and myths about Dasai. They relate it to different things. People don't know this unless they take the initiative to study it or they've heard about it in their families, right? So when we talk about representation of women, it's extremely important in preserving culture because the generation above us, the responsibility of giving that culture was put on women. So it's really funny that I hear that in the community there aren't much women on board. Here in BC, I'd like to take an example. The Women's Society is doing a very good job and in bringing the women together, like these events, Dasai events, Women's Day, International Women's Day events, panels. I got the opportunity to speak on a panel about discrimination, a certain type of discrimination, about body positivity. That's a whole other issue. There's so many expectations from women, and all of these expectations have been taken off of women, and it's so sad to see that type of mentality still prevailing, even though we've moved physically away from that region and society. Let's pick and choose the good things from both cultures, not the bad.
Right. I'm gonna change sort of the topic a little bit. I know we talked a lot about kind of what organizations are doing wrong, kind of what the older generation is doing wrong. I want to change and end this conversation off on what can youth do on a day-to-day level, or just on any sort of level to be more involved in the community. Like, what does that mean? And so if you guys, despite all of the barriers, you are where you are, you continue to stay involved. What can just an average Nepali youth do to be closer to their culture and make a bigger impact in the community?
So if I could suggest, I think we talked about schedule. So I think we're talking about time commitment. So I think even if you break it down into I'll volunteer for one event like that, it doesn't have to be 3-year commitment. It can be I can volunteer in this. like we all understand we have competing priorities, but like if there is a, I don't know, event that's happening or something you want to do, work it around your schedule. It can just be like 1 time or 2 time event. It doesn't have to be that you have to go to every meetings, you have to go to every but you're showing initiative in your own ways, I think, would be like my approach to it. Because I like competing priorities are like a truth for everyone, but I think especially for university students, there are times, for example, like, you know, midterms usually happen around certain like our festivals and stuff. So obviously you're not going to be as involved there, but that other times when you're maybe less free, maybe take an initiative, bring something that you think you're passionate about. Like Asta mentioned about like the idea of destigmatizing menstruation, right? That's a huge issue. Like it, like even now, like there are certain taboo that I wonder why I feel uncomfortable breaking it. Like those are things, and I think we don't always have to do it formally. It can be an informal thing. It can be a conversation you're having. So I think because when you guys were talking about women's like accomplishments not being, a lot of the things women do to preserve culture is informal. So it's a question of what gets recognized and what doesn't, and are you doing it for recognition? But that you can cause a change by doing it informally and then decide to you'd want to go a formal way. So that there are like different ways to change, and that it doesn't have to be a particular way. Like make it work for you. That's my suggestion, kind of.
I have a suggestion. This is something that I actively do in my smaller friend circle rather than the bigger Nepali community. I always do my favorite events with a Desi twist or a Nepali twist. For example, I'm hosting Thanksgiving next weekend, and my I love Thanksgiving. I host it annually, and this year I'm like, fall colors, but make it Desi, make it Nepali, you know? So everyone will hopefully show up in saris to celebrate our culture, but assimilate with the Canadian culture. I think, again, like the youth, if you want something, if we want something, we need to ask for it, you know? And yes, we have been silenced for years because we lack wisdom, as the generation above us always mentions, and we don't have much credibility and value because of our age. But we need to now set boundaries, help our parents and the elder generation understand what cultural evolution really means, and also really raise our voice and ask for what we want. I want a Nepali themed Christmas, let's say, you know, Nepali community ma pani हामी Christmas मनाउनु पर्यो, किन दशैं मात्रै मनाउने? Example दिएको यो चाहिँ हैन, मनाउनै पर्ने पनि हैन। तर example दिएको, किन नेपाली कम्युनिटीमा खाली हिन्दूहरू मात्रै छ त? हैन नि, अरु cultural के अरे अरु कल्चर्सहरू पनि छ, अरु रिलिजन्सहरू पनि छ। हामी सबै चीजहरू किन सेलिब्रेट गर्दैनौँ? किन दशैं नै यति धेरै हाइलाइट गर्छौँ, हैन? There's Eid, there's Christmas, there's Thanksgiving, there's Easter. Considering the fact that Canada is such a diverse place and every single Nepali individual has diverse amount of friends. All of us have friends from all over the world, no? With different backgrounds. We don't only just hang out with Nepali people. So since I migrated from China, I celebrate Chinese New Year every year, even though I'm in Canada. And with my Nepalese family here, I will celebrate Chinese New Year because that's part of my identity. So it's really important for the youth to really ask for what we really, really want. I know it's hard, but if it's hard for you, scratch a friend's back and be like, girl, you know, you can speak, so speak for me. I think it's really important to find like-minded individuals, ask for what you want.
So I'm going to add, so I think that the main thing, and I kind of do it, you know, same thing, we were talking about things that you can do daily, and as they were touching on, converse, just converse, just talk. You know, if it's, you know, like I actually speak 6 different languages. So in order for me to maintain knowing those 6 different languages, what do I have to do? I have to speak those languages. So that means I have to, you know, actively take the time to, you know, find my, you know, French friends, speak to them in French. I have to find my, you know, Desi friends, Hindi friends. I have to speak, you know, Hindi with them, you know. So you have to converse. And I think, you know, day to day, that's what you need to do is converse. So, you know, if you, you know, like I said, I know about the coding, you know, Nepali youth coding group. How will I be able to spread that? By conversing. Those are things that you can do daily, because that is how you know, one, maintain, and that's how you strengthen. How do you, you know, if a local restaurant is like, you know, oh my God, it's amazing. How do people know? through talk. Forget Facebook, not always Facebook, but not always digital media, but talk about things, if there are, like they were saying, Nepali issues, in terms of menstruation, in terms of different things, speak about those things, formally, informally, what they touched on. But like I said, we really need to just speak on a daily basis. And I think that, and I think that's the true form of that's lacking, is that we talk about a lot of different things. Like we talk about, I think same thing with elder generation. It's the same conversation again and again and again, like bihe kaile garchau, until I was married, and I got married late. I got married late for our community. I got married at 30 years old. By then, I've probably had like 10 years of people telling me bihe kaile garchau, there are different topics of conversation. And Asta was saying, we need to ask, hey, can you not speak about that? So for a while in my household, I had a rule, because I was, I worked 2 jobs, I went to university, and I had a rule in my household. When I was off on Sunday, bieko kura hundaina. You cannot talk to me about beer. You can talk to me about Nepali politics. You can engage me in anything else, except the same dialogue, and I think that's what happens to youth. And that's what we see in the organization is, yes, there is 10, in Toronto alone, I think there's maybe 20 organizations, but it's all the same dialogue. You have, 4 different organizations organizing the same party, same thing. Why can't you do it like Asta was saying? Maybe one does Dasai with a twist, there needs to be a different dialogue. And, that comes from us. That comes from the beginning, which is, like I said, on a daily basis, 1, conversing, and 2, connecting. So if you connect, I have a thing where if I connect with one individual, in the field, I connect that person with another person. So I say, hey, you know what? So, like I said, there are, tons of achievements in the community. And one thing I really, really wanted to say is that I do really, 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 even though there are many, like I said, variables and obstacles and whatnot, I do appreciate the organizations that are out there. I do appreciate all the elders, because they are right in a lot of things, in terms of experience, in terms of, how to do certain things. If they didn't organize the way that they organize, we would have really nothing. So I do appreciate their initiative there. And even a meeting like this for youth, you're actually at least you're trying to give us a chance. Maybe you haven't done that in the past every day, or maybe you're not doing that, but this is a step in the right direction. So we are moving in the right direction, slowly but surely. But like I said, I put it on my Facebook, and I actually, I'm not on Facebook. I only put it up just for this, So we are going in the right direction, but we need to connect. We need to connect with other individuals in different fields, and we need to not just connect with them, but like I said, converse and let other people know that those people exist. If there are women coders, or if just coders in general, if they're interested, how do you know? There's that. If there's a Nepali film festival, how will they know? Converse, connect. There are, like I said, there's a Nepali dental clinic, the first Nepali dental clinic. I don't know about all of Canada, but by Nepali, youth, elder youth, they have opened it because their background is in dental hygiene for not just for Nepali people, but they speak Hindi as well. It is easier to go to the dentist for a lot of elder generational people to go and say, oh, mero yahan dukhecha, mero yo dan dukhecha, yo bigrecha, whatever, instead of going to a Canadian, like I said, a dental hygienist. So, there is that out there. I know a huge career coach on LinkedIn, Sweta Regmi, she's huge on LinkedIn, and she teaches people how to write their resume, how to get a better job, so many different things. How do you know? Converse, just talk. We talk all the time. So just keep talking.
Marigold, I would really like to add to one thing, though. When we say converse, one thing that we never really talk about is what type of conversation.
Yeah.
And one thing that I really want to highlight is positive reinforcement is really lacking in our community.
Mm-hmm.
When your child achieves something, give them credit for it. Don't tell them, okay, now you've achieved this, so achieve more. Give them positive reinforcement, be it like, as a मैले नेपालीमा एउटा speech दिएँ, my dad will actually message me and say, damn girl, I didn't know you actually knew that vocab. And I'll be like, thanks, Dad. That's positive. That makes me want to learn more Nepali. Do you know what I mean? When I used to translate Nepali Chinese for my family that would visit me, they used to positively reinforce it. And that's why I took up Chinese as well. Whereas in comparison to my brother at the time, he wasn't interested in Chinese because maybe he didn't receive that type of positive reinforcement. He didn't receive that type of motivation, let's say. And that positive communication really goes a way to make that they can. Elder generation bata, there might be some resentment towards us because we're not assimilating as fast as they want at the level of accuracy that they want, the technicality of the language, the culture, whatever it is, just not knowing all those technicalities. That's something that you should understand. We're only human. We have 3 different languages to juggle here: French, Nepali, English. We have other goals in our life that we've gotten the opportunity to have exposure towards. So this is not our first priority. If you want to make it our first priority, you have to come from a positive approach. And conversation should be positive, not negative.
Yeah,
and we need to cancel expectation.
Yeah, and just to add quickly to that, so same thing with conversing, it also means conversing in Nepali. Imperfect or not perfect, converse. Because like I said, you will only learn to, converse if you, do so. And same thing with the positive reinforcement. My brother does not speak Nepali like I speak Nepali. And that's because, like I said, when my brother speaks, his accent is different, his, tone is different. And unfortunately, like I said, it goes down to, like I said, the elder generation say, that's not positive reinforcement. Instead of saying, त्यो शब्द होइन, it's like यसरी भनिन्छ, same thing. But converse in I don't have time to expand, but in the broader sense of converse. So converse about everything. Just change the dialogue, different dialogue.
Change the approach.
Ranju, you had a point as well?
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna say, I think you're both are saying like approach with a strength-based approach. Like say this is what you did correctly. Don't like focus on that you were able to do this much. Like don't be like, why didn't you do this? That like conversation and even if you're tackling like changing any organization, you should start from a strength-based perspective so that you're not already starting at a negative point. So I think that's what I think in a way our generation does a little better is that we do tend to take like a strength-based approach, and I think that should be how you approach change, because like negativity doesn't like it is a factor, but it's kind of like you're already starting at a losing point versus you start by saying this is what we do right and this is how we can add on to it with the strengths that we have. So yeah, that was all I agreed with both of
I have
you.
a question for you guys, actually. Do you think that maybe it's fear of evolution? Because I feel like the cultural preservation is highlighted so much, but cultural evolution is not highlighted at all. At least that's my experience in our community. What I see is that there's a lot of fear of what the unknown is, what our kids are going to turn into. That's a phrase that I've heard so much, that if you assimilate with Canadian culture, that means bigrinsa. And I've heard that in the community. Whereas growing up, all I was taught by my parents was assimilation, adjustment, adapting, because that's what humans do best. We are a species that can adapt really, really fast to different things, and we're very smart. So why is it that we're so focused on preservation and not evolution?
I think the conversation needs to be that we are talking a diaspora. Our Nepali understanding of Nepali culture, for example, is not going to be the same as someone say straight in. And I think that's something we need to we're not preserving a culture that's from Nepal. We're preserving a culture. We're talking about a culture like a Canada-based culture with Nepali added to it. So I think it's a conversation of diaspora. It's not a conversation of you're not trying to change a culture back home. You're trying to add on to the culture here. That's how I think the conversation should be, and I think that's where we kind of falter a lot, because I think we're trying to keep every tradition alive, and that's impossible. That's not how culture. It's impossible for any culture. Any culture has to adapt to changes. It doesn't mean that what you're doing is wrong, but you do need to add some new perspective. That's what makes it continue, right? So I think the conversation needs to be about diaspora, not about. I can't speak for Nepali people back home. I don't have that background. Like I can only understand, but like it's an understanding that's colored by living here. So I think that's where the conversation needs. That's how I take it, at least.
I think in terms of that fear, that really is, it's a fear that every parent will have. It's just our parents have an added layer of it. It's not just a generational fear of like not understanding, the new generation. There's a cultural fear as well, because there's a whole Canadian culture that our parents don't understand or don't know of. So it's natural to be fearful of something that you don't know. I think that's where youth can come in to show parents the positive side to it. But we are kind of we're going really above time. So I just wanted to wrap up a little bit and say, honestly, we brought up a lot of really great points. I'm hoping that through this discussion, we can actually change things, change the way that things are structured. A couple of really great points were brought up. So in terms of approach, understanding the needs of youth and women, making, informal conversation and every day. Community isn't just about an organization. It's about helping others. Like when we first came to Canada, there was a family that helped us. And in return, my parents have helped countless families that have come to Canada, right? So it's about community on like an individual level that creates a larger community, not necessarily just an organization. So I think hopefully we can take away a lot from this conversation and actually change things. But I wanted to thank you guys for having such a great discussion. I learned so much from it. And it was great meeting you guys. Thank you.
It was nice meeting you.
Thank you.
I just want to say I'm so happy with how many women we have here on this panel.
Yes.
And I just want to as well, I do want to thank NRNA Canada and Jirindai, like I said, and I don't want this to be reflected. Like I said, I don't want the last reflection to be that we've bashed certain organizations and whatnot, but because like I said, we obviously everything that we have learned is from elders. Not everything. I'm not going to say everything, but our culture, how we learn about culture, all of those things did come from them. And I am, like I said, very appreciative that this movement of actually trying to, engage youth and talking about our obstacles, because, till now, I haven't had a chance to speak about my obstacles. I've talked about different things, but not really, what has kind of hindered me from involving myself. So I do appreciate NRN. And I do thank them for, the opportunity. And it was so nice to speak with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, NRNA Canada team. This was an amazing opportunity. And यो मौका दिनुभएकोमा धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद. राम्रो राम्रो मान्छेहरु भेट भयो त्यही भएर. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for like the opportunity and a platform to have the discourse that I don't think we would have had the opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Perfect.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye.